welcome back to another video. I have a really interesting one here, interesting in my eyes, boring in probably everyone else's. So I implemented a new logging system in which someone would have to report all of their fights. Essentially, Triple U, for example, which is me, obviously. I took Path 5, then I took Path 5 again. And I took down, no, that's not true, I took Path 6 and then Path 5, and I took down Purgatory on Node 12 with Hercules, Mole Man on Node 19 with Apocalypse, and so on and so forth. And so essentially what that comes out to is when I have all 10 people doing that, I have something like this. So this is War 1, obviously the last war, and we can see Joel here, who's also a YouTuber, right? And he took Node 4 with his baby account, or I guess we could call it a baby account. Dr. Octopus, a rank 3, and it's a solo. Here's pod 1, which is paths 1, 2, and 3. Pod 2 is 4, 5, 6. And pod 3 is 7, 8, 9. And so you can look at this. Here are the bosses as well. This one's a little bit cut off. This last boss section is not really for aesthetics, whereas the other ones are a little bit better looking. It's more just for data. And so you can look here, and you can see the summoner. You can see the amount of shared fights they took, the amount of path fights they took, the amount of times they died. Fights, you only get credit for the fight if you land the killing blow, and so if you do 90% of the health and die and call for backup, that doesn't count as a kill, which I think is fair because you're using the backup. The only confusing part is that boss fights and boss deaths do include node 22 and node 23, and I made the conscious choice to do that because while they are technically shared fights, they're closer to boss fights because every single person has a chance to take it. And so it gives you a lot more options, and so therefore I think it should be categorized as such. They're also hard nodes, but that's a different issue. So you have this log, and people send a log and they send it in. And every single war, I'll be filling this out for all 12 wars. And after that, here for example, here is just the database. So it takes it from all the other different sheets and it puts it into one sheet. And so you're going to see that each war we're going to have different stats, but obviously those aren't filled out yet. And so our summary, we have our summoners, the amount of kills they have, the amount of deaths they have. Solo rate's not perfect because it doesn't include the fights that they took and did not, the fights that they took and died to. It counts as a death, and it takes away one of their fights, but it doesn't add a fight on the denominator. So it's a little bit probably lower than it should be. But I think it's totally fair, and it is what it is. It's harder to track that, and also I just think it's a better measure anyway. Fights per war, obviously, this is just how many fights they took in War 1. So here you go. How many kills they have on the path, how many kills they have on shared fights, kills on boss fights, path, shared, boss, and this is total for the season, but obviously it's only one war so far. And similarly, we have our path percentage for our solo rate for on path, our solo rates on shared fights, and our solo rates on bosses. Even here we have, for the first war, we died 5 total times, twice on paths, once on a shared fight, twice on bosses. Each pod, and this only goes for shared fights and path fights, it does not include boss fights, but each pod died once. And if you can look down here, it's just the same thing. And so essentially the way and here's my favorite part, is weighted solo rate. So I have this expectation, this is probably it's about Platinum 1 in terms of what we set as our baseline. And so our baseline is we want a 95% clear rate on paths, which means that you'll die between once and twice, a little bit closer to twice overall as a battle group on paths every war. Shared is you're going to die once per war, 90%. Bosses, you're going to die twice per war, 80%. And these aren't crazy high, nor are they crazy low. I think it's a good baseline. And so essentially what you have here is weighted solo rate right here. This column right here is essentially taking these numbers and saying, okay, if you die in a path fight, it's a little bit worse than if you die in a boss fight because you're supposed to do, in theory, according to these two numbers right here, 4 times better, right? Because you're going to die 20% versus 5%. So in theory, a path fight is 4 times easier than a boss fight, and therefore you're going to be penalized 4 times as much for it. And as you change these numbers, it will actually change it. So if we expect people to get a 60% solo rate on the path, boom, and it completely changes what the solo rate, what the weighted thing is. And so you can tailor this to how you want to set your expectations. I think this is good for, once again, around Plat 1. maybe high plat 2. And so this is the whole thing. This is an error that I'm going to actually end up fixing. But essentially, you have all this data, and as long as you can log fights every single war, which is a little bit, but it's not that big of a deal, you put them in here. In War 2, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to put them in here. This gets filled out for you. This gets filled out for you. All of this gets filled out for you. And so what you have is you have this weighted silver rate where 0 is set as the average. So anybody above 0 is doing better than the expectation for a Platinum 1 player. Anyone is currently doing worse who's under. The only thing is it's only been one war, so if you die once, you're skewed. So obviously if you die once, you're going to have a negative solo rate at the beginning. So it's a little bit skewed in that way, so I wouldn't take much stock in the first couple wars, but here's what it is. It's all this information that you can do. I'm happy to give this out if people want it. I put a lot of work into this, and I'm happy to do it. And I think it's a really good tool because it's a relatively easy in terms of it probably takes 5 minutes per person in the battle group. So what is that, 50 minutes, and then another 20 minutes to put into the sheet. So it's 50 minutes overall split among 10 people, and then whoever's in charge of the sheet will probably have to spend another 20 minutes putting it in every war. But in the end, you're going to have a complete breakdown of everything that has transpired. And essentially what I'm trying to fix is Mew has a solo rate of 100, right? And Rain Man also has a solo rate of 100. And now nothing on Rain Man, he did not die at all. But he took 3 fights. That solo rate is way less impressive than someone who's going to take 9 fights and have a solo rate of 100. Similarly, he took 3 path fights, whereas Mew took 4 path fights, 2 shared fights, and 3 boss fights. These should be weighed heavier than a path fight. And so essentially the goal, especially of your weighted solo rate, and this one is just per war, so it's literally just going to get divided by the number of wars, and this is total. The goal is to make up for that. And so here's my sheet. If anybody wants to take it and use it, please do it. I spent a lot of time on this, and I'd love for more people to be able to use it. And I mean, here's just the idea. Here's what I've been thinking about. Here's how I think of Plat 1, and it's a little bit generous. I would not like to perform this way personally, but I think it's pretty much fair. And so yeah, here's my weighted solo rate again, and the only thing you have to change is the logs. You also have to change this number, so you're going to change the war number. And I mean, yeah, so here's what it is. I would love people to use it if they want to, but at the very least, you can just listen to some of this, me being a nerd and how I would break down war. I just started this season, so we'll see how it goes. I'm definitely going to have a wrap-up video after, but yeah. Thank you for watching.